Hi, good morning. My name is Mahesh. I welcome here my good friend Charu Sharma for a small interaction, a man who has so much to share with us on the world of sports, a good friend of mine. Thank you, Charu, for being with me. I really
Delighted.
appreciate it. Delighted. My pleasure, Charu. Charu, something that I don't have to ask you a question, but there is so much that you have in you. Can we know your journey?
We want to begin at the beginning. It's a very long journey. Watch out what you ask for. However,
Well,
I was very fortunate to be born and brought up in a school that had an enormous amount of sporting facility. The Mayo College in Ajmer, by the way, it's still a fabulous school with about 23 sports that are offered. So you can imagine sports was something that was just there all the time. It's up to you to pick it up and run with it. Now, I could have run with many sports, to be a little immodest, and I did with a few. But my early forte turned out to be springboard diving because Mayo was a school that had a 25-meter swimming pool with diving boards. And we had a bit of a swimming and diving tradition by the time I was growing up. I was 4, 5, 6, 7, and there was a lot of swimming and diving going on. So I kind of fell into the pool because it was a cool thing to do, especially because of the heat in Ajmer. And because we had good coaching and good facilities, and because not too many people, I suppose, in India had pools and diving boards, I started doing really well very quickly. So it became my early forte. Now, when you have an early forte, of course, other sports tend to drop off because of the time spent on one sport. And I think from the age of 8, I started becoming some kind of a national champion in various swimming events and diving as well. And by the time I reached about 12, I said, okay, only diving, because swimming took too much work. So I became this national springboard junior diving champion for many years. And the connection with sport became my life. Of course, I had to carry on because I was in school, plenty of other activities, but sport became the central focus of my life from a very young age. And thankfully, life has allowed me to keep it a central force all these wonderful years.
so nice to hear that. But what intrigues is that you have been in the world of sports, but you also started your career as a professional. Sports has always been your passion, but your career has been very different. And then you came back to the sporting industry. That twists and turns with the growth of the sporting industry in this country. You seem to have got found that space in the growing sporting industry.
So I was very fortunate because through school and college, my sports continued. So did my education. So I didn't lag. There was no lag there.
That's interesting.
Which is important because those days, it was impossible for anybody to make money on sport. Even the cricketers in the 70s didn't earn anything. So it was not possible to make a living out of sport, which was pretty evident then. So I said, you got to keep your education alive. And I wasn't really thinking about being a professional sports person then because of the lack of livelihood options. So education had to continue. And thereafter, I was fortunate enough to get employment in a tea company to begin with, and later at Wazir Sultan Tobacco. Both places were conducive to keeping my sport going. In Calcutta, all those clubs just sort of welcomed me in. I played all sorts of other sports because my diving, by the way, I'd retired at the ripe old age of 19. But every other sport continued as seriously as one could, despite having a job. And even in VST in Hyderabad and all the rest of the stations where I was at, they said, yeah, please go ahead with sport. I mean, wherever possible, VST actually sponsored a lot of sporting events, became the biggest sponsor of Indian sport. And who was right at the center of it all? The guy who was deeply involved with the world of sport. So every time there was a sporting option or a sponsorship option, I was right in front. So my connection with the world of sport, in a different sense as a sponsorship company, remained very strong. And my connection with playing sport remained very strong because I took time to keep my sports alive. And then, of course, it all changed, which we'll get to, I suppose, next, because India opened up in the very early 90s. Liberalization, globalization, you remember those terms? And all of a sudden, from the 1982 Asian Games, now that's going back again into long stories, but I started my broadcast career. It stayed with Doordarshan because that was the only channel in India at that point of time. And then it pole vaulted.
The Asian Games was the turning
1982.
point. That is the turning point.
Yeah. So that gave
Was that a turning point in Indian sporting?
Huge.
Okay.
Massive turning point.
And so for you?
Well, and for me, of course, very importantly, a very important milestone in my life. A turning point in many ways. One, of course, the concept of big time sport coming to India, the creation of infrastructure, the belief of sports persons that we can do well at the international level because, of course, it was home turf. And for us, people involved in the world of sport, a commentary option became something that was strongly looked at, even though it was only honorarium based at that point of time because there was only one channel. But the opportunities and the exposure was tremendous because there was only one channel. So I kept that going, and the company allowed me to keep that going, much to their credit. Thank you very much, VST. And they said, yeah, it's to our credit if you keep doing this visible work. And please, so whenever Doordarshan called for some major national, international events, I
You were
actually did
there.
it. And then, of course, the big change, the second big change. But let's go back to 82. The other change, of course, was television.
That's true.
Because
That's
color
how
television
color
came in.
television came
Yeah,
in.
so I'm
That's
a
right.
television baby, as it were.
Oh, that's
And
nice.
and suddenly the population of India could turn on the television, color television,
That's true.
and watch a lot of sport. And I hope that inspired people to even play more, but certainly watching sport became something to look forward to in India. And then the big leap came, of course, we're back now to 91, 92 with the liberalization, globalization. India opened up, overseas channels came to India, and then all of a sudden, what was happening to me in the last 8, 9 years with Doordarshan now could turn into a livelihood with private television in the world of sport. So I quit my corporate career. I think I worked for about 10, 11 years. A wonderful time where my sports continued, playing as well as talking about it. So I became the first professional commentator in India because I gave up everything else and did only
And got
sport and
into
commentary.
the profession.
But everybody's been
You
very kind.
you turned your passion into your career. That's so nice. Charu, there is something which is very interesting. You seem to have anything but a very unconventional career. Nothing out of the box way of building your career uh, from being a passionate sports person to getting into a corporate life and again getting into the world of sports. You know, it's you literally got into where your heart belongs. Now, but there's something that you said very interesting is you went to a school as a backup. You went to a school as a backup, and then you wanted to look at a job career, and you could quit professional sport at the age of 19. And in India, particularly where most of our parents said sports or education, it's a very sad for many people. Um, this has always been the truth, and I know that in from a very broad angle, it may not be true to many, but in the quest of wanting to play professional sports, you particularly don't do as well in academics for many reasons, for various reasons, be it the timing of school, the curriculum, the subjects, the attendance, the different. I'm not getting into details, but having said that, and in the compulsion of um, in Indian demand of wanting to finish 10th and 12th, correct? You actually give up sports. How was that sports and education balancing, and what would you um, give an advice? Has it changed now, and what is the change, and what is the advice for the coming generation?
Well, Mahesh, I must confess, the times are different. And I don't think that it's correct to try and compare what was in the 70s when I was going through school and college and what it is now. Because the world has changed and the world of Indian sports and academics has also changed completely. So I was fortunate to be at a time when academic progress, or prowess, should I say, and you're right, I also didn't do particularly well in academics, but that's okay. You know, I mean, the pressures were different. But I did well enough in sport to keep my ship sailing. And it was just very important for us to mix the two because almost nobody was playing only sport and leaving education at that point of time. Mind you, after school it did happen, or perhaps even for some before that, because who were my main competitors in springboard diving at the national level? My closest competitors were from the services and otherwise from the railways and some other organizations who were doing nothing else but training all the time.
Okay.
And I was going through schooling in college at that point of time. So my training time was, I don't know, 1/5 theirs.
All right.
So that was always a bit of a problem. But I said, fair enough. I mean, that's my current situation. And obviously, springboard diving is not a sport that then or even now could be turned into a profession.
Okay.
So there's no question of sport becoming a profession in terms of a professional player. But of course, you could get really good at it and get a few medals and this, that, and the other, and be well known in the world of sport. And of course, it is a huge help in terms of health and fitness, and set you up for the rest of your life in terms of a better health practices. So all that was central to where I was. But I was quite clear that education, in whichever manner, and not even excelling education, is something that you needed not only as a backup but as a necessity.
Okay.
Backup is like, okay, well, if I don't do well somewhere else. No, it wasn't. It was important to make sure that you got your school degree, to get your college degree, and sport was just time management.
Okay.
So you worked really hard at sport most of the time you had, and you worked as much as you could on academics, and you went on. So, yeah, I mean, a lot of sports persons will say, Mahesh, that they sacrificed a lot in terms of not being able to do many other fun things that others did with their time. So that fun time was really only practice, only working hard at your sport. But I think the times are different now. And to answer your question, it's a bigger problem now to be able to seek sports as a profession and also keep your academics alive. And which is why, and I have to come to you for that. And when we talked some years ago about Prose Edu, and you said that, okay, let's try and set up systems for those who want to pursue sports seriously and don't want to leave academics completely. I mean, you can't be in a regulation academic environment. I understand that, because there's certain concessions that need to be given to people who are following or giving a lot of time to sport and other activities, perhaps music. And therefore, I think what you're doing is very, very important, because sports persons and those seeking other avenues, not only sport, by the way, anything else as a profession, need to be offered an academic environment that doesn't overly stress them, because you can't get stresses on both ends. And I think Prose Edu, therefore, is filling a very important vacuum in the life of those who want to pursue a serious profession which may not be connected to academics, and yet they've got to keep their academics going. And that service, the wider platform that it provides to many other people around the country or elsewhere, the better, because that is the need of the hour today. Now, alternate forms of education that can allow you to complete degrees and yet pursue.
Could you say it alternative, or would it say curated education, in terms of trying to build a career based on your ability, trying to teach somebody?
That's a much better word. I don't know the jargon you do, but curated education, I think, further narrows it down, fine tunes it. So not only are you
to
trying
one's ability,
to one's ability and to one's career path. It has to be education that can provide you some stability in the future, which doesn't go against what you're trying to pursue.
That's
so for sports persons, for instance, there's a different kind of curriculum that can be set through school and college. For people who want to go into music, different curriculums can be set. For people who want to go into, say, the world of fashion, all these other forms of profession, of trying to make your passion into a profession, need curated education to keep it going, but differently curated for different professions that people might want to pursue as a passion. And if sport, music, fashion, etc. is only a sidelight, not a passion, then of course you can pursue normal or regular education in academic institutions. But the institutions, if they can only offer, as you said, curated education for people pursuing different forms of passion as a profession, that is the modern way of ensuring that you have education as a backup.
We all know that education is important. We all know that curated education is going to be the name of the game. To some extent, the NEP is also written that way. I'm sure it'll get implemented over a period of time. But what I particularly want to know from you is that the kids are in the world of sports through methodology of a proper curated education and taking it forward. How do you see a career growth for those who don't make it in sports? The point I'm trying to say is there are two ways of looking at it. The suboptimal, or the other way to look at it is from a positive angle, that there are 25 alphabets after A. So how do you see that career?
For those who are pursuing serious professional sport, now we know you use the word may not be able to make it now, and another cliche is that nobody ever fails. You're always you can be B, C, D, or E. Doesn't matter the 26 alphabets.
You're either you're either a winner or a learner.
True, that's the new one. You're a winner or a learner.
That's it.
Yeah, but there's a lot of truth in that. And a lot of cliches are basic truths, but because they're repeated so often, they get a little boring. So the learnings that one gets from your own passion, I'm using this word passion very importantly, Mahesh, because it's not just sport. I know sports is the most important part right now for Prose Edu and for all the rest of these things going on which support profession, but also perhaps music. So it's either sport or any other passion, could be music, could be fashion, could be whatever else.
Yes.
And to those who pursue it, I think there's a lot of learning within that anyway. And then the additional learning comes from the world of academics. Because if you're in, let's go back to sport, if you're pursuing a sport, you have your own colleagues there, your own, teammates or others, or even as individuals, you have friends who are playing peer group. But that's a very narrow peer group. And if you are also taking education along, that's a separate peer group from whom you're learning a lot. So that the wider sense of learning, of education, is not just your passion. It is so much more in the rest of the world. And that one tends to lose out if you're not pursuing education as well. Because that peer group, those teachers, that setup, that universe keeps opening your mind to several new aspects of life. You're not tunnel vision. It's good to be tunnel vision when you're playing. But when you're not playing, your mind needs to open up to all sorts of other inputs that are coming in from everybody. You need to absorb so much more in life. And I think if you keep pursuing education alongside your passion profession, then I just think you turn out to be a better all-round individual and human being. And that comes to your help when your sport finishes. At whatever level. You could finish at A, champion. B, maybe a little less.
Whatever.
C, bronze medalist. Doesn't matter. But wherever you finish and whenever you finish, your passion profession, because as a sport, for instance, you might finish at 23 or 19 or 34. After that, what? After that, if you have received reasonable education and kept that up, I think your opportunities are much wider, your understanding of the world is much wider, your chances of succeeding thereafter in whatever else you may wish to do is a lot stronger than if you are a sports person who was not really focused on education at all, or didn't quite like it, or didn't have the curated educational experience. It could be a real setback at that point of time, because then you may feel, what am I good for now? Not much, which is a terrible feeling.
Charu, interesting that we always look at education as, I've not used the word a stepney, for your later years. But one of the case studies in Germany, I'm given to understand that when they'd lost the 2002 football cup, and when one of the reports that came in to the committee saying that they lost the match because, of course, the theory of 24-48, where the decision was done in a 24-degree comfort zone and the war always happens at 48 degrees, and most of them failed because they were not schooled, and that actually came as a surprise. And the reason why somebody made that statement is because the game of analytics actually came in, and you actually learn analytics through the process of learning, which by and large comes through the methodology of schooling. It's a process. We all go to school. We may not remember what we did in our 10th. Most of us would have forgotten. But the process of learning actually imbibes, gets into you, and that helps you to play sports better. And in today's age and time, it is the world of analytics. So I think along with that, how much important is for those kids to actually believe, because sports kids are intelligent. It's only that some of the subjects may not be wanted to them. What advice would you give for kids in terms of their career option, the B, C, through education, that will help them to build their sports?
That's the other reason curated education is very important for those who are pursuing the world of sport as a professional. Because the youngsters at that point of time, you could be 12, 14, 15, 16, 18. And I don't mean to say that you lack intelligence, because there's a lot of sporting intelligence, but you may lack judgment on your own in terms of decision making. What am I good for? What am I life has so many facets. And if you're pursuing sports as a passion, as a profession, then you might lose out on some other facets. But the educational end of it will continue to open your mind to all sorts of possibilities in the world.
Sure, that's true.
And that is what helps. Life is what? It's a series of making judgment calls. Do I turn left today? What do I do today? Everything is is a call.
Okay.
And those calls for any individual, they make superior calls in terms of their own analysis of themselves, of who they are, what they've achieved, when they should stop their sport or not. If you follow curated education and you keep all those other mental avenues open, you keep sharpening your intellect in many other ways because of the education that you're pursuing, I think your decision making smarter.
That's interesting.
And so if you do very well in your sport, great for you. But should you not do, should it be on alphabet B or C, it doesn't matter because your powers of reception, absorption, decision making are a lot sharper than somebody who may be tunnel visioned only into sport. And I think it's the smartness that develops. It's a funny kind of word, but if, I hope you know what you mean. What I mean. So the smartness that people develop by pursuing not only their passion project or their passion profession, but keep educational avenues as a comrade, as somebody that goes along with you, they just take better decisions all their lives. If you've got an education along with it, curated through somebody like Prose Edu, then I think that your decision-making powers are fed from a much wider set of inputs.
Okay.
And therefore, not only in your sport, but through life, I think people who have combined these two, worked very hard at their sport or their passion profession, and kept education alive, not with the eye of getting 100 on 100, but just keeping education alive, I think that decision making is a lot smarter. And to me, that's a very big difference between being truly successful. What is success? Our decisions, I mean, our
You widen the horizon.
Yeah. So our definitions can differ about success. But one of the very important aspects about success is making smarter decisions. And I think people who can combine following their passion profession as hard as they possibly can and also keeping educational inputs alive just tend to have smarter decisions. They weigh things better, deeper, wider. And to my mind, that leads them to a world where they will achieve success not materially, but by just taking smarter, better decisions through their lives.
Lovely. One more thing, Charu, that I wanted to ask you is that you have seen the change in the whole sporting world right from the 80s, the way it was born in the new age of worlding sports. Can I ask you at what stage of growth are we? Are we going to how far are we to be called a sporting nation, if I can use that word? And what is the requirement both by the students and everybody for us to become a sporting nation?
That's such an important question because obviously I'm not the only or complete judge of it. I have my opinion. And in the past, I used to be very critical and perhaps negative or discouraging because we are truly very, very far away from being a sporting nation. We're a better sports watching nation now than we were, but that's not a sporting nation.
That's interesting.
Yeah, but of late I've kind of softened a bit, and I think that every move, every advancement adds a drop into that glass, and that glass is filling. Perhaps not halfway through, but now I've started seeing sport in India from a lens of positivity.
Okay.
There's a lot of positive movement, advancement, for sure. We're very far away from being a sporting nation. That's because of the kind of nation we are. 1.4 billion people. How are you going to provide some level of equity when it comes to sporting infrastructure? You can't. So it's still, unfortunately, I mean, there are many angles here. You've asked a question that can take about, I don't know, 5 days to answer. But here we go. So on one hand, of course, people keep talking about sport for all.
Okay.
You can't. It's too big a nation. There's too many people. So it's just a nice thing to say, sport for all. But there's a possibility that we can educate people to please follow some kind of healthy activity, perhaps sport, for just better health and fitness.
True.
That's one angle. At the lowest end of the spectrum,
True.
It is fitness and health. Pursue some kind of fitness or health activity, which could be a sport at the lowest level. Now, again, easier said than done, because in a vast part of India, there is no sporting infrastructure. So perhaps they can do something as simple as just walk a little more or whatever else, some freehold exercise, etc. So that's education for following a healthier life. And of course, many people do it naturally anyway, on their own. They don't have to be told. But I think this messaging is important. The messaging of please continue to do something in the world of sport or outdoors for health and fitness. at the lowest level. Then we get to those who have some possibility of getting some sporting infrastructure. Yeah? There it becomes a question of, okay, if you are exposed to sporting infrastructure at a young age, uh, children these days, because parents are a lot more amenable to sending their child into some kind of sport, then it's up to the child to say, okay, how much do I love the sport? How much do I want to take it forward? Pushing children into professional sport, bad idea. But of course, if the child is showing a lot of natural ability, you want to do the best you can. You want to provide as much as you can. A lot of people in India still can't provide much in terms of infrastructure or equipment, but you tend to encourage as much as you can. So that is taking sport a little seriously to find out which alphabet you end up at.
That's
If not A, are you good enough for G or T or whatever? It doesn't matter. But sport gives an individual, there are many benefits. Uh, gives them a lot of confidence, self-confidence, self-belief, all these wonderful things about sport. If you take it a little seriously, they become a part of you. And all these criteria are also important for success later in life in whatever you may choose to do. But because you played sport a little seriously, I think you've got a few attributes that can help you succeed in whatever else you may do in life. Maybe not in that sport. Then you take it the next level, which is, all right, I think I'm getting pretty good at this. I'm getting a little bit of support, or I want a little more support and I can get much better at it. So then, of course, decisions have to be made whether I will take the sport now seriously enough as a profession, or just try and get really good at it by the time I carry on my education and get other professions. So that just makes you appreciate sport a lot more. And sporting appreciation is also important because you tend to draw examples from it.
That's
and
true.
You take sport as not just a pastime, but you take it as a serious instructor,
learning
teacher about how to negotiate life. And the final step, of course, is that if you are dedicated enough, if you're fortunate enough to be given the right push and the right opportunity, then of course can I take it to become a profession where the knowledge of the various levels of that profession is very important. Because when you take up a corporate job, if you're an MBA, etc., you know that you're going to hit MD. And if you're not perhaps ideally educated for a corporate career, you must know where that career could end for you. Okay. Similarly, for sports persons, I think that knowledge of where that career could end for me is very important. Monetarily, if I'm going to play a sport, that doesn't really have to me if I'm a diver. Yeah, I know there's no real profession attached to it in terms of livelihood. But I know if I dive well, I could perhaps get a job with somebody who's giving sports persons jobs. All right. So you need to know the professional environment, professional opportunities of the sport that you choose. That's critical. You've got to know what the professional outlets are, or should I say, the remuneration capability of every sport at every level. I think that is a very important teaching that the people who are taking you forward in the world of sport need to tell you. Your coaches, your parents, and others need to know the various thresholds of remuneration for every sport, of receivables, of revenue for every sport. You can't be playing a sport seriously, not being aware of the livelihood implications, and then realize later that I've worked so hard, but there's no livelihood. So that reality check is very important.
Which somebody actually told me is sports and astronomy are truly a humbling and a character building exercise if you really understand it in depth. And a sports person is not only an asset to himself but to the nation if he actually learns how to build his self-esteem. That actually brings, so in a country like India, like certain states are already working, like Orissa example, where you uplift the guy through a sheer upliftment through self-esteem, and that's a wonderful thing. And that's how we bring a different aspect of sports, one at the professional level and one at the bottom end of the social sector. But what is the most important advice that we are all looking from you, Charu, is there are ingredients for these guys, the sportsmen in this country, for them to become either champion or an asset in the nation or character building exercise, multiple facet. I want to, I want you to share your mantra that you have seen from the 1980s. You have seen the country grow, and you also know where it's going to be in the future. You seem to understand that very well. Can we hear from you your mantra for these kids?
Ha!
What is that they must do to build their career as well as a nation?
Well, I must preface that by suggesting that it's very difficult for young people to think in depth about where they're going with the world of sport. So they need that input from others, like coaches and parents, particularly, and
Okay.
teachers. Having said that, the first step is there are no shortcuts. Perhaps for any professional life, I don't know, but there are no shortcuts in the world of sport.
Okay.
It is enormous hard work, a lot of focus, a lot of dedication, and that very important word, a lot of sacrifice. If you're not prepared for all of that, sport is not for you.
Okay.
A lot of people get into sport and they kind of fool around a bit and they waste a lot of time.
Escapist method.
Yeah, and kind of, oh, I'm pursuing sports seriously. But you're not. If you're not working really hard, if you're not sacrificing, if you're not, burning the midnight oil in terms of sport, if not academics. One. Two, I think a certain smartness needs to be developed within you. Because, sometimes equal ability people, the smarter player wins. So strategic thought is also very important. Even if you're just running 100 meters, there's a lot of strategy involved, and leave alone much sports that require much more time. So that strategic input is a question of sporting intelligence, and that can be developed in many ways through coaches, of course. But that's why plays a very important part, because your mind just is able to receive more when you're being educated alongside in a curated way. You're learning many other things, and that keeps your brain sharp. So I do think that superior thinking athletes win a lot more than those who merely work very hard.
Nice. That's
So,
interesting.
and finally, of course, to my mind, is very important. I hope other people consider it too. Cleanliness.
So,
I think the cleaner one is as a sports person, uh, the more calm one remains inside. Because you know how it is. If you're doing nothing wrong, I think the stress levels stay away.
oh, lovely.
And I would like to talk about, through your medium here now, let everybody know that there is no harm being really clean, even if you end up an alphabet D.
Beautiful.
So that cleanliness, the ethics, very, very important. And of course, there's so much more like diet and this, that, and the other, which is all talked about. But these are the points that I right now today feel like emphasizing.
Fantastic. That's
And all I can say is, which I tell a sporting gathering all the time, and I truly believe in it, that if there are 100 people sitting around, only one perhaps will become a champion, or 1,000 people. What happens to the other 999?
that's true.
Because what we don't want is a nation full of bitter, distressed, frustrated, discouraged, wannabe sports persons. We want a nation where those 999 feel, I've worked really hard at my sport. I may not have reached alphabet A,
I,
but I have learned everything that it takes to succeed in the world, in our world here, which is all the things I've talked about, all the hard work, all the focus, the concentration, the getting along with people, being clean, taking good decisions, everything that helps you succeed in the future, I have learned because of the world of sport. So if I've ended up at C and not A, it doesn't matter. Now it's time for me to shift. I take a weighed decision, a better decision. Time for me to shift. I'm going to now start doing something else, whatever that may be. If it's not, I mean, you don't have to keep weighing it materially, whatever it may be. You could start a nursery, I don't know, anything. But please do so with the strength and the knowledge and the self belief that you have
Brilliant.
learned to absorb all the criteria that it takes to do well. You may not have done well or as well as you thought in your sport, but all those attributes will help you do well in life. So we need these sports persons, the other 999, to be valuable contributors to the nation, because they have learned the most difficult things in life in terms of hard work and focus and concentration and getting along with people and everything else. So use that for whatever else you want to do in life. Don't be bitter and disappointed and frustrated.
Brilliant, Charu. What an advice. You touched upon passion, you touched upon the talent required, and you also spoke about the attitude one has to have in life.
I think, Mahesh, when we first started talking about this, and you wanted to do Prose Edu for taking the academic aspirations of, if not aspirations, of the academic necessities of people who want to pursue sport seriously, to make sure that they have that as a wonderful add-on or a backup, as a wonderful add-on to their lives. It was just a, a thing that India needed. the world need it. And I have to wish you the very best of luck. And I have to hope that more and more parents out there, because they're the ones responsible for their children in terms of education, realize that there are many ways out. And if your child is showing a serious aptitude for following a passion profession, it is possible to curate their education in a manner where they do not lag. So
Lovely.
thank you. Well done. Great service.
Thank you, Charu. Thank you for all your support. I really appreciate your input. And I wish and I pray and hope people take his advice and build their career and reach their peak in life. Thank you, Charu. Wonderful.
Pleasure, Mahesh. Always.
Wonderful. Always
Always.
a pleasure. Thank you very much.